All right, good evening. Thank you for being here, and thank you for those that are joining us online. My name is Don Connolly, and I'm the Public Information Officer for the United States Attorney's Office, and I'd like to introduce the United States Attorney, Robert J. Higdon, Jr. He was nominated by President Trump in August of 2017, confirmed by the United States Senate in September of the same year. He's a native of Greensboro, spent nearly 24 years as a federal prosecutor, serving time in both the Western District of North Carolina and the Eastern District of North Carolina. He was our criminal division chief from 2002 to 2013. And I'd like to ask Mr. Higdon to come up and start the press conference.
Thank you, Don. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for your patience as we waited for the court to complete its work today. Lawyers from my office have just left the courtroom in the federal courthouse in New Bern, North Carolina, following the sentencing of Brandon Marquis Jennings. Mr. Jennings received a life sentence. In fact, he received 5 life sentences today that will all run concurrently, as well as significant but lesser sentences on other counts. And he received those sentences from United States District Judge Louise Flanagan because he was the leader and organizer of a human trafficking operation that victimized and prostituted women here in the Eastern District of North Carolina and elsewhere across the United States. Mr. Jennings, who is a native of Raleigh, was charged by a federal grand jury sitting in this district with 13 offenses related to his human trafficking activities. These charges included 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, 2 counts of sex trafficking of a minor, 1 count involving the manufacture of child pornography, 7 counts of interstate transportation for purposes of engaging in prostitution, and 1 count involving the use of the internet to promote an unlawful business, namely the prostitution business. On June 13, 2019, Jennings was convicted of all 13 counts following a jury trial before Judge Flanagan in New Bern. He has been in custody and awaiting sentencing since that time. This case began back in December of 2016 when officers of the Raleigh Police Department answered a domestic violence complaint which involved Mr. Jennings. At that time, Raleigh police officers learned that the victim, who is referred to as TC in the indictment, worked as a prostitute for Jennings. According to what the officers learned, Jennings had become angry with TC because she wanted to leave him and stop working as a prostitute. Their argument escalated and Jennings ultimately assaulted TC, punching and kicking her repeatedly. Fortunately, TC was able to call the Raleigh police for help and left the phone line open during the assault. Following that December incident, officers learned the full scope of Jennings' prostitution of additional victims, many of whom were contacted and provided details concerning the operation. They told about their role in it and Jennings' leadership of it. They also learned that Jennings used Backpage as one of the online platforms through which he advertised his operations. The investigation ultimately identified a number of victims, many of whom provided statements to investigators, and several of them bravely testified at the trial of this matter in New Bern. I won't go into every chilling detail provided to us by these victims, but in summary, the victims described how Jennings groomed these women and led them to believe that he would care for them and provide for them. Indeed, several of them believed that they were in love with him based on their interaction with him and the promises that he made to them. He selected women who were particularly vulnerable. Some were down on their luck in different ways. Some were addicted to illegal drugs. He lured them into compromising situations. He physically and mentally abused these women, and he left them with no ability to remove themselves from the situation, even if they had wanted to do so. Let me use TC as an example. Jennings met, and I use the word met in quotes, the young woman on a social networking site. He learned that she lived in a state in the western part of the United States. They developed a rapport online and shared sexually compromising information. Eventually, Jennings traveled out of state to meet with TC. He, in fact, did meet with her and promised to maintain a relationship with her and to care for her, and convinced her that working for him as an escort would provide them a better life, and she agreed to do that work with him. Jennings then began to post ads for her like she was some sort of commodity under a fake name on Backpage and Craigslist. Over the next several months, Jennings and TC traveled to several states so that Jennings could prostitute TC, including here in the Eastern District of North Carolina. Hotel rooms were rented in TC's name. Advertisements specific to the location in which they were operating were placed online, and Jennings taught TC techniques to identify and avoid law enforcement. In an effort to control her, Jennings deprived her of all of the earnings from her prostitution activities, leaving her penniless and completely dependent upon him. When TC finally summoned the courage to tell Jennings that she wanted to leave the prostitution business, Jennings used a number of techniques to keep her. In addition to holding all of her money, Jennings promised a relationship with him. He used her children as leverage to make her afraid to leave. He convinced her that her work as a prostitute would benefit the children and was their only way to survive. At other times, Jennings forced TC to stay by physically assaulting her, threatening to harm her or to harm or kill her children. Additionally, Jennings did not allow her to eat unless she earned enough money through prostituting. And so she often went hungry or without sleep because of the deprivation of food or the fear of deprivation. This fact pattern, or one very similar to it, repeated itself over and over from victim to victim. Jennings identified vulnerable victims. He convinced them to prostitute themselves. He left them no way out. He physically and mentally abused them, stole their money, and left them with no option but to continue in the prostitution business. Several of these women, these victims, came forward and cooperated with law enforcement and testified at trial. Today's life sentences are another step in their recovery and healing, and it's a big step in our effort to end this defendant's illegal activities and to prevent other instances of human trafficking and the abuse of women and vulnerable victims all across the Eastern District. And I don't want to understate the importance and the difficulty of what these victims have done. They found themselves in horrendous circumstances. They had few options, they had difficult choices, and they faced abuse, both physical and psychological. And yet they mustered the strength and the courage to go into a federal courtroom and tell their stories to a jury and a judge. They dug down deep and walked into that courtroom and told the details of the shocking and chilling way in which they had been treated, the way they had been sold into prostitution. And I want to thank them, I want to commend them, and I want to make sure that we continue to work with them to rebuild their lives and to put all of this behind them. Sadly, this case is not unique. The problem of human trafficking, that is exploiting a person for labor, for services, or for commercial sex, has grown in recent years. In fact, to quote the leadership of the Department's Civil Rights Division, human trafficking is modern-day slavery. And from its sinister core outward, it is a crime of exploitation. It is taking a terrible toll on some of our most vulnerable citizens. It is having a shameful effect on communities all across our country, all across North Carolina, and all across the Eastern District. In the last 4 years, my office, like so many other United States attorneys' offices across the United States, has ramped up the investigation and prosecution of these cases as we try to protect these vulnerable victims, as we try to rid our district of this scourge. Whether they are preying on women, on those who are users of addictive drugs, or on those who are here illegally in our country, or whether they are victimizing our children, these human traffickers, these predators, have no regard for the value and sanctity of human life or the quality of that life, and they are willing to trade on sex and labor for their own personal gain, and we are determined to stop it. In fiscal year 2018, which is the latest year for which I have statistics, the Department secured a record number of convictions against 526 defendants in federal human trafficking prosecutions. And I believe you will see the same sustained effort in terms of numbers for 2019 and 2020 when all is tallied up. In addition, we have targeted those who have provided the means for traffickers to advertise and promote their exploitive crimes. For example, last year, investigators and Department of Justice attorneys took down Backpage.com, the Internet's leading source of prostitution-related advertisements and one of the platforms used by this defendant that resulted in the sex trafficking of minors and adults. The department obtained guilty pleas from Backpage.com, its chief executive officer, and its marketing director, and has now seized over $150 million in real and personal property derived from proceeds of their illegal conduct. We've also secured convictions and lengthy sentences against members of extensive transnational trafficking networks. Determined to do more, the Department of Justice has asked that each United States attorney designate one or more of its best, most talented prosecutors to focus on this issue. And we have done that here in the Eastern District. Two of those prosecutors, Assistant United States Attorneys Aaron Blondell and Brian Stephanie, were in that courtroom today to ensure that Mr. Jennings received the justice he so richly deserved. We as a department have increased our focus on the legal and moral rights of crime victims and have coordinated our efforts with victim advocates, both in the public and private sectors, all across our district to focus on this problem. Recently, the department distributed more than $35 million in funds to provide housing to victims of human trafficking, including $500,000 to First Fruit Ministries in Wilmington, here in the Eastern District. We have also increased our education efforts to reduce demand for commercial sex, and we are investigating and developing larger, more complex, and more impactful cases. We are prosecuting trafficking enterprises that affect our district, our state, and our country, as well as those which operate internationally. Here in our district, since 2017, we have prosecuted 13 human trafficking-related cases involving 16 defendants. To date, we have obtained convictions by trial or plea of guilty in 9 of those cases involving 12 of those defendants. During the same period of time, the courts in our district have imposed a total of 1,676 months of imprisonment. That's nearly 140 years on those defendants, not including the sentences which were handed down today, and not including any restitution which may be ordered in this case going forward. Our courts have ordered more than $1.1 million in restitution for trafficking victims in these cases. And we can provide you with a list of those cases which have been completed to date if you'd like. There are 2 cases awaiting sentencing at this time. Sidney Crandon, who was charged with the sex trafficking of a minor, faces between 10 years imprisonment and life imprisonment in a case that is scheduled for sentencing in October of this year. Enrique Williams faces up to 10 years imprisonment on charges involving the interstate transportation for prostitution under the Mann Act. He is scheduled for sentencing in December. And we presently have 7 cases which have been indicted and which we anticipate will be resolved by either plea or trial in the coming months. I would be remiss if I did not recognize and honor the work of our law enforcement partners in this case, the Raleigh Police Department and the Department of Homeland Security Criminal Investigations. They are both committed to this important work and deserve much credit for the results we've achieved today. I want to commend the Raleigh Police Department for the excellent work they did in this case. Not surprisingly, our local police are often the first responders who learn in the first instance about human trafficking or develop the initial facts which lead to a trafficking investigation. They are the ones who respond to the domestic violence calls, like they did here. They are the ones who communicate with doctors or hotel managers or other people in the community who suspect something isn't right and who first flag the activities which are a part of and a clue to the human tragedy that is trafficking. They are the ones who often make the first contact with the victim of these crimes, and they find them when they are at their lowest point, their most vulnerable situation. Likewise, Homeland Security, our partner in so many critical efforts to enforce federal criminal law all across this district, was instrumental in following this matter beyond the local activities and uncovering the interstate nature of Jennings' crime. They have worked tirelessly alongside the Raleigh Police Department to gain the full understanding of the scope of this crime, and that larger effort is what really positioned us to achieve today's sentences. These law enforcement agencies, frankly, did an amazing job in this investigation. And today's sentence is, in my mind, a reflection of the quality and value of the work and reflects the court's understanding of the significance of what has been discovered and stopped. I also want to commend Assistant United States Attorneys Aaron Blondell and Brian Stephanie, who I've already recognized. These 2 dedicated prosecutors have taken on these extremely difficult and often very emotionally taxing cases because they, like all the members of my office and all the members of the Department of Justice, are committed to ending these horrendous crimes and to protecting the lives and safety of these vulnerable victims. I'm grateful that we have public servants like Aaron and Brian who do this hard work for us. Now, let me offer an opportunity to Scott Crabb of the Homeland Security Criminal Investigations, who I think is online with us, if he'd like to make any comments on behalf of his agency.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Scott Crabb. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge for Homeland Security Investigations covering Raleigh, North Carolina. First, we'd just like to thank our partners in this investigation, the Raleigh Police Department and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of North Carolina, who, along with our HSI special agents, investigated these egregious crimes committed by Brendan Jennings and brought him ultimately to justice. Collectively, our agencies have done a tremendous job serving the community and the victims in this case. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery, and the abuse and torment that was inflicted on the many victims in this case demonstrate why human trafficking investigations are a top priority for HSI. We're committed to working with our law enforcement and judicial partners, and together we will continue to root out human traffickers and prosecute them for these terrible crimes while continuing to safeguard victims and support their recovery. The arrest of the traffickers, just one step in the recovery process for victims. We take a victim-centric investigative approach, which places equal priority on the victims and the apprehension of the trafficker. The sentencing of Brendan Jennings reflects the seriousness of his crimes, but also reflects the relentless investigative efforts of HSI, Raleigh Police Department, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. So on behalf of HSI, Raleigh Field Division, I'd like to thank again Raleigh Police Department and U.S. Attorney's Office for the tireless work and service for the victims in this case and the community now being protected from Brendan Jennings. Thank you.
And I'll be happy to take any questions that members of the media might have.
Could you tell me if any particular venues were involved, any motels, anything like that, in this particular, in these trafficking cases?
I don't have a list of, in particular, motels in this case or in our larger investigations. There are some, but there were venues like that, locations like that here in Raleigh, other places in the Eastern District, and then in a number of states where they traveled to and operated. I don't have that list of hotels for you right now.
Okay. You said that a number of other states were also, there were also a number of other states. Could you tell me which states they are?
I don't know if I know the list of states right now.
I don't have that list off the top of my head. That's something
we can provide that to you. That's it. We have, pardon? Okay, Aaron and Brian have been able to join us, and if they know the answer to that question. The question is, what states were involved in Mr. Jennings' crimes?
Thank you, Bobby. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. There were a number of states involved. I'd need to get a full list in front of me, but off the top of my head, I know Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Texas, California, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. I've got the peanut gallery here with me helping me. Anything else I'm missing? Maybe, and I think possibly Florida as well. So in large number of states.
And for those of you who don't know, that's Assistant United States Attorney Aaron Blondell who's speaking.
And so this seems like a pretty big operation. Do you know if anybody else was involved? Are you planning on, well, do you think there are any other suspects related to this trafficking operation?
Well, it is an extensive trafficking operation, and obviously there was Mr. Jennings, and then there were a number of women who were victimized, but who were prostitutes and were participating in the activities. Aaron, let me ask you to take that question. The question is, are there, beyond the individuals who were involved in the prostitution activities, the victims, as well as Mr. Jennings, are there other individuals who have been charged or that we anticipate charging? We won't name those people, but answer that question for us if you can.
Thank you, Bobby. The answer is not in this case.
Okay, this will be the end of this case. But as I indicated, we have a number of pending prosecutions, and I can tell you, and I cannot go into them obviously, but we have a number of other matters that are under investigation. These type of activities and the same level of extensiveness as we've seen in this one continue to exist here in the Eastern District. We continue to pursue them, and we're going to continue to charge them.
And how young were the victims? What were the youngest victims?
At least 2 of them were minors. Let me let Erin be more specific about that. Erin, the question is, how young were the youngest victims?
Yes, one minor was 15 when she began prostituting for the defendants, and the other was 16.
So the other was 16,
Yes.
15, and 16.
And there were questions about whether Jennings was fit for trial and mentally fit for trial. Could you tell me how you concluded that he was competent?
Well, whenever anyone suggests or their attorney suggests that they may not be competent to stand trial, then an evaluation is done. And the evaluation is usually done by individuals, doctors that are provided to us by the Bureau of Prisons, and the defense has an opportunity to present their expert opinions, and then the judge resolves the question of whether or not the individual is competent to stand trial. In this case, he was deemed to be competent, went forward to trial, and was convicted.
And how long did this operation take?
In terms of the investigation?
In terms of the investigation, and how long do you think this human trafficking operation was?
Okay. Erin, let me ask you to address that. The indictment addresses the time period that we could prove that the operation was going on. So, Erin, if you'll address that first, and then address the length of time it took to conduct the investigation.
Sure. The time period of the indictment is from around 2013 until December 2016. That's when the incident with TC occurred that Mr. Higdon talked about. And initially there was local investigation and then further investigation, and ultimately we indicted in August 2018.
Okay. And so the investigation by your office has been going on.
Erin, in terms of the investigation by our office, we would be working alongside the Raleigh Police Department and Homeland Security investigation, so we would have been involved that entire time.
Those are all my questions.
Okay. Any questions from anyone that's online with us? Okay. Okay. All right, we're going to give just one more chance. If anybody has any other questions, otherwise then we'll close it down, as I know you all have other things to move on to. Okay. All right, well, thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you for covering this important case and this important issue. We're very grateful. Thank you.